Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Third, and today I am joined by Nate Baglios from Cali Audio, who, yes, you'll be like, how has Nate got from California all the way to here? Yes, he actually got the flight, and then you drove.
From London.
My God, how long was that?
7 hours.
Oh my God. And you had to drive in London as well, which is a heart attack in itself.
Yeah, it was fine. I'm really bad at driving on the left side of the street, though.
You've been fine. You're still here. So, long story short, Nate has decided to come through because I am trying out the new Cali SM8 speakers that I have decided to buy because I like them that much. So we'll discuss briefly about that as well. But the main kind of reason that Nate's came down is because he wanted to do my Atmos room, and we'll say calibrate my Atmos room properly, because through the process that we have been through, I can see just how different it is compared to other ones that I've been using. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take the knowledge that we put into the SM8 and Atmos room and talk about measuring stereo speakers. So this isn't going to be about sub-integration. There'll be a separate video with Nate's advice that I'm going to make talking about sub-integration. But this is just going to be about stereo speakers. As you can see, I've got lots of notes. I've got Paul Third notes here that don't make sense to anybody else bar me. But we're going to try and go through the entire process to how we think it could help you to calibrate and measure your speakers to get the best translation possible. And you can do this with any speaker. Now, also, the reason why I've decided to make this with Nate is because Nate has a lot of experience tuning rooms and having loads of Cali speakers in different rooms. Like, on top of your head, how many rooms do you think you've done, average?
So at least 10 Atmos rooms.
Okay.
And then a large number of rooms, just stereo as well.
And we're talking big commercial studios, smaller rooms, like...
All of the above.
Yeah.
From the worst home studio you can imagine, all the way to some of the best commercial studios on the planet. So
Nate is very, very experienced, but again, he did want to ensure that we caveat this by saying that Nate isn't like an acoustician. Okay, he isn't. Dunning-Kruger is always on our shoulder, as we always like to remind people. But with the experience that Nate has about speaker design, and again, having the experience of tuning so many speakers in so many different types of rooms, I thought this would be a great video to make because you are going to learn about things that even I didn't know until yesterday. I can't believe some of this kind of golden nuggets that you dropped for me. It's crazy. In terms of placing speakers in a room, Nate, what is your normal advice for people? They're like, I want to buy a pair of Cali LP8s and I've got a small bedroom studio. What's your recommendation to start off with?
So the biggest recommendation I would make for anybody, any pair of speakers that they're buying, any room that they're setting it up, as much as you can, you want to have an open mind in terms of where the speaker's going to go in the room. And it is so worth it. It's free to put the speakers in the right place.
Yeah.
It costs $0 to get the speakers in the right place in the room. If you take a day and experiment with a bunch of different positions, even if you're not measuring, even if the only verification that you're doing is your own listening tests.
Yeah, just using your ears.
Yeah, you will have a better result than if you go into this process thinking the speakers must go here, and there are all these reasons why. So with that in mind, there are some best practices. A lot of people like to talk about the quarters rule. So we put the speakers 1/4 of the way into the room. Yep. So if we're in a 4-meter room, the speakers go 1 meter into the room. And that's the front of the speaker at the 1 meter mark. Yeah. You put yourself then 3/8 of the way into the room. So you would be 1.5 meters into the room. Yeah. And in many rectangular rooms especially, that's going to put you in a position where the major room modes, so the first, the second, and the third are avoided. And you're only at the listening position exciting some of the higher order room modes. Yeah. Which tend to be much less amplitude, which is another way of saying, rather than exciting the big room modes that are like at 100 hertz that have huge 10 or 12 or more dB spikes or dips, you're exciting room modes that are higher in the frequency range, like above 300 hertz, yep. And the dips are closer to 3 to 5 dB. Another good place to start is putting the speakers up against the back wall. You are guaranteed to have problems in that position.
Yep, I've got the SM8s, and I've always had my speakers right where they are, which is right getting the boundary interference and But it's interesting when people talk to me about the quarter rule, because it doesn't always work for everybody. In my room, I get a big, huge null. And we'll talk about nulls, because there's something that I didn't know about that Nate told me about yesterday. But there's a difference, what many acousticians talk about, predictability in room modes. So what is more predictable in terms of like your room modes? Is it the back up against the back wall, or is it the quarter?
It could be either. It's because it's not just dependent on this dimension,
Yes.
on the length dimension where you have the speakers firing into the room. It's also dependent on the side-to-side dimension. It's also dependent on the front-to-back dimension. Yeah. Typically, but this is very broad brush, and when we say typically, I'm talking like maybe a hair over 50%, it's going to be more predictable to put the speakers against the wall. But when I say predictable, we know we're going to have problems there. Typically, the advantage to those problems is the predictability of those problems, as well as the fact that a lot of the time, the interference at the listening position is going to be constructive rather than destructive. So rather than trying to fill in a null, we are bringing down a peak.
Correct. Speaker placement is very, very, very important. And what I've been told by so many people is genuinely just get the speakers in the room and just listen. Just genuinely listen and find the place. But I think another important point to remember is symmetry. Symmetry is always a very important point. So for me, I did get a tape measure out and I measured exactly the distance between the left and the right, because symmetry is something that, again, comes into time alignment, again, which we'll go into further.
Yeah. And sometimes, so people get really wrapped around the axle on this too. Sometimes symmetry isn't possible.
Yes, correct.
And a lot of people are working in rooms that were not designed to be studio rooms. You know, maybe they got a funky wall somewhere or a pillar somewhere or something. Symmetry is, again, great starting point, but it should not be the determining factor. If you have a position that seems to work well, that is asymmetrical, versus a position that doesn't work well, but it's symmetrical, so it should be working better. Go with the asymmetrical position. Yeah. Honest to God, take a full day.
Yeah,
like this is going to save you so much time in terms of your mixed translation. This is going to save you so much money in terms of things that you're doing to mitigate problems that come up in your room. That's the most important advice. Stop the video right now. Take the day to put the speakers in the right position in the room.
100%. Every big engineer I've ever spoken to has said that exact thing to me. So once you've got the placement correct for you and it seems best in the room, then comes the treatment. Now, many people do this the wrong way around. It's almost like will batter the room with treatment and then try and get the best position for the room. And I think what the word that me and you were talking about yesterday, and that kind of was the word that clicked, is intent. Is having intent with your acoustic treatment. Now, really what you're thinking about with acoustic treatment is many people think it's, if I treat my room, that will give me the best squiggly line. There is more than the squiggly line, okay? When we think about acoustic treatment, it's absorption and it's diffusion. And the reason why we have absorption is because we have lots of room modes and we have lots of reflections. So when we are mixing critically, we are always thinking about decay times. And when we are wanting to bring down the reverberation time and the decay of the frequency spectrum, you need absorption to be able to do that. And I think what's very, very important to mention here is that, and again, Nate said this to me earlier, is that you don't really separate the two in terms of frequency response and decay. Because what we're looking for isn't, theoretical perfect numbers. We're looking for balance. Yeah. And when you have a good balance of decay time in your room, and you've got a good listening position, then theoretically that's going to result in a pretty balanced frequency response as well. Obviously, we've got variables, including our desk that we know about, will give us maybe a bit of more of a low mid build up and add constructive interference. But in terms of treatment, you have been in a lot of rooms where they have went completely OTT and they think that dead is perfect. When actually, what I think many people need to hear is that we do need resonances in a room for translation, don't we?
Yeah, so when we're going into a room, we're typically aiming for somewhere between 250 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds of decay time. Now, you just showed me a video by Jesco where he's saying actually 150 milliseconds is a good baseline. I think there's room to have a conversation there and perhaps establish a better standard for what a small studio especially ought to sound like. But this is the most hyperbolic thing I'll say, and I will die on this hill. The worst rooms I've been in have been the rooms with the most treatment. And I think people tend to go really overboard, really add way too much absorption in the room, and the room just sounds dead. Mixes sound dead. There's no liveliness to it. And what that's going to mean, you're going to try and make up for that.
Counter translation. It's all counter translation, isn't it?
Yeah. I love that word, counter translation. So yeah, your mixes are just not going to translate well in a room like that. It's also not going to be very fun to work in. The rooms that I've seen that work best have a very sort of natural characteristic when you walk in. You can hear the reverberation of your voice without it being, bouncing around all over the place. And when you turn a mix on in the speakers, it sounds natural.
Correct. And that's why I think the most important term to use has to be you stick the acoustical treatment where it's needed.
Yes.
And many people will be like, well, how do I know where to find, all of this information about where is the best place to put it? Now, this is where Room EQ Wizard becomes really important. Yep. And we will be using a lot of Room EQ Wizard in this video and in other videos as well. So to measure the decay time of your room, you can use the RT60, the waterfall, which is, for some people, maybe too much resolution, but if you do want all the details per frequency, the waterfall is going to show you everything. And there's also a spectrogram, which many people like to use. Kind of choose your poison, that's what I always say. But if you want the most detail, would you say the waterfall is the best way to really get it detailed?
Yeah. If you're looking to get laser precise in terms of detail, the waterfall plot is nice.
And I also think what's important to mention is that there are a few things that by kind of default, they will work quite well. So again, couches at the back of the room works, absorption on the back wall, first reflection points, again, your ceilings as well, getting your ceilings of absorption up there, bass traps in the corners I've always found works really well. Those are the things where if you get those nailed, normally you'll find that the room decay should be in a good place.
Yeah, normally.
Yeah.
Those are things, what I will say, and I said this to you earlier, I have never seen those things hurt.
Yeah, it's a good point.
One thing that I'll point out is you said you want to handle the first reflection points. What you don't want there is absorption necessarily. Yeah. You do want diffusion at the first reflection points.
And a good point you made to me was, because it's funny as we say that, so I've got two GIK standing gobos. I was like, but that's absorption, but absorption is diffusion.
Yeah,
it's not point as well.
It's not necessarily great diffusion, but it is diffusion.
Yeah,
and so those are acting there. If you have the option of putting a dedicated diffuser at the point of first reflection, that's usually a better choice.
Yeah. So all of that stuff, many of you will know, but it's important to talk about that because as soon as you get that sorted, then theoretically you can get any speaker in the room.
To an extent.
To an extent, which is why. The speaker choice is important, right? So when we say you can stick any speaker in a room, yes, you can stick any speaker in a room, but speaker choice is very important. Now, obviously, with having Nate from Kali here, I thought it'd be important to talk about the differences in design and the limitations that can happen with budget, because obviously, what's a great thing about Kali is that you really did make a speaker at that price point that really changed the market in many, many ways. And there's a reason why many people at that price budget, this price budget right now I'm looking at is, the market LPH, you're looking at $500 a pair.
Yeah, $600 I think now.
That's a very, very good price for 2 8-inch.
Yeah.
Two ways. And again, it's a very neutral sounding speaker as well. But again, there are limitations to, making a speaker on a budget. So with the LP range, it's a two-way, $500, $600 a pair, and then you've then got the next step up, which is the IN range. Now, the interesting thing about the IN range is that it's a three-way coaxial design. Now, these jump up to £1,000 a pair. Yeah. And many people have asked me, I don't know why they ask me, it's because I've got Kali's, but they always say, why would I jump up from, a £500 two-way to a £1,000 or $1,000 coaxial three-way? Now, there is a very specific reason why that is. Now, many people get confused because, the LP8s and the IN8s, they're using the same amps, they're using the same materials, they're using the same baffles, but it's that coaxial design that's very important for a very specific reason. Tell people why, if they're considering mixing and mastering professionally, a three-way or a three-way coaxial design is a really good choice.
Yeah, so every two-way speaker, every traditional two-way speaker where you have the tweeter and the woofer and they're separated in space is going to have a phase cancellation in the direction that those two are oriented.
Yeah.
So it's all a fancy way of saying above and below the speaker on a traditional two-way, you're going to have phase cancellations. What that means is that reflections you're hearing from the ceiling and reflections that you're hearing from the floor are not necessarily congruent with the direct sound you're hearing from the speaker. And it should be pointed out, you are always hearing reflections from every surface in your room. Your brain is really good at rejecting what it considers to be noise and accepting what it considers to be signal. When the reflections match the direct sound or are congruent with the direct sound, your brain interprets that all as signal, and that's what allows your brain to build a stereo image. You have this really nice center. You have details in the mix that you can place spatially, which really helps the mix process in terms of being able to orient yourself around changes that you're making to certain elements and how those are not just affecting those elements, but how those are affecting the mix as a whole. You can work faster, you're more confident in your decisions. So a two-way speaker has this problem of, in the vertical plane, you don't get the reflections that you want that your brain's able to integrate. Yeah. So your stereo image isn't going to be as good. One way to get around that is to build a coaxial speaker. If we build a coaxial two-way speaker, meaning we have a woofer and a tweeter, a problem that comes up is a phenomenon called intermodulation distortion, which is basically a Doppler effect on the signal that the tweeter is producing. So your woofer is moving back and forth, your tweeter is moving back and forth within that, and your tweeter signal, as it travels through the air, is being pushed and pulled by your woofer signal. And especially as you add SPL, as that gets louder, that problem just gets worse.
Compounds, yeah.
Yeah. So the way that we've gotten around it, and we're not unique in doing this, Genelec does this in their the ones, Ex Machina does this in their three-way speaker, is we have a coaxial mid-range tweeter, and we have a physically separated woofer. The coaxial mid-range tweeter, the mid-range doesn't have to do a lot of back and forth motion. In the IN series and the SM series for us, it's less than a millimeter, which acoustically isn't really moving at all. The woofer is handling all this back and forth motion. We call that excursion. But because the wavelengths that the woofer produces are much longer, so a 220 hertz wavelength is roughly 5 feet, call that 1.6 meters or so. The separation between the mid-range tweeter and the woofer don't really matter. Acoustically, this is a point source. So in 360 degrees, you have phase coherence around the speaker, which means now not only are your side reflections giving you congruent sound, but your top and bottom reflections are giving you congruent sound. Theoretically, every reflection point in the room as it arrives to your ears is congruent with the direct sound you're hearing from the speaker. And if you have the opportunity to hear one of these speakers, you will notice that right away. The stereo image is incredible. It's lifelike, it's detailed, you can really pick everything out, and it's not just this left to right stereo image. You start to hear things up and down, you start to hear things front to back as well. It also really helps with the translation of the speakers, being able to hear this stereo image, even if the playback is going to be on substantially worse speakers, you just have a better sense of what your mix sounds like.
And a very, very strong claim that you said to me earlier and yesterday was that you do truly believe that there is, for stereo imaging, stereo placement, there is no two-way on the market that would give you as good stereo imaging as a coaxial three-way.
Yeah. And so then there's other benefits to having a three-way, which is why you see a lot of three-way speakers. The woofer doesn't have to do this mid-range work. Yeah. So the woofer is only concerned with moving back and forth, moving a large volume of air. The mid-range handles the mid-range, obviously. Yeah. The tweeter doesn't have to do what for the tweeter is low-frequency work, where it's also moving back and forth quite a bit. So every element in the system is able to do what it does best. A traditional three-way that is not coaxial now has 2 points of phase incoherence because we have 2 crossover points. Yep. Versus our design and the other ones that I mentioned have 0 points of phase incoherence.
And would you say that the three-way coaxial design, when you brought out the IN range, was really the design where you really started to see a lot more kind of, professional industry engineers starting to pick up Kali more and being able to trust the Kalis more because, again, the imaging was just...
Yeah.
So, I mean, actually, you said this to me earlier about the IN8s, and for the price, at that price point of $1,000, you have said to me that, Paul, I just do not see there being a better speaker for mixing and mastering at that price range. And actually, you said there was a few big names that actually use IN8s. I mean, what are some of the names that have used IN8s professionally?
Jeff Ellis uses IN8s. Nico Bolas uses IN8s. Matt Wallace and Will Kennedy use IN8s. There are multiple people who have won multiple Grammys on records mixed on IN8s.
So then it gets to the point where many people, and this is, again, a valid point, many people will say, well, that if it's enough for them, then it's enough for me. And I would say, yeah, I agree. I think, if it's good enough for them, for what it produces, then absolutely, go live your best life. However, there are many people like me who are very analytical listeners who needs a very, very certain sort of sim. Now, I am a distortion freak. Everybody knows who watches me this channel. I'm Distortion Freak. I've got now the A900, which is like the cleanest preamp and headphone amp on the market going. I've got like the topping D93 discrete, and all my headphones, again, all planar and, a very ultra low distortion. So transient response and distortion is very, very, very important to me. And it's something that with the SM8s, when they first came in, straight away, I heard the things that I wanted to be different when I heard. I've got the LP8s in the Atmos room, and I've got the IN5s. Now, the distortion is always the thing that I hear for me when I'm like, the transient response isn't as fast and responsive as I'd like it to be. And personally, I just like a cleaner sim. For me, cleaner. Distortion is very, very, very important, because especially in the low end, I always find that bass and kick separation is a lot easier, and many people don't know this, but you can actually hear distortion more because you've not got the masking.
Right.
So what many people don't understand is that if you've got a lot of distortion in your system, what people then have to do is then to hear more distortion. If you want to add more distortion, then you need to actually physically have more distortion to then stop it masking. So when you've got a cleaner system, you actually hear a lot of distortion more, which for me is really important. And a big reason for that with the SM8s, if we can talk about the difference between, a budget, because again, $1,000, but it's not a budget for a lot of people. But even the thing with the LP8s, because they are using the same amps, the headroom in the SM8s is like night and day different, and the distortion is night and day. So what is it about the design of the SM8s that allows it to have one, like such faster transient response, but also so much headroom?
Yeah, so the IN8s have done really, really well.
Yeah.
And like we just said, there's a lot of material that you have heard that was mixed on IN8s. Yeah. The difference between the IN8s and the SM8s, the IN8s are built to a price point. There's
Correct.
Compromises made.
Limitations, yeah.
Yeah, limitations to get to that price point. They're built on the same platform as the LP8, which was always designed to be an entry-level speaker. They've done so well. They've gone into recording studios where an entry-level speaker has no business being.
I see so many. I would say, especially on Instagram, the amount of IN8s I see, even people in my Discord that are IN8 users, and they swear by them.
Yeah.
Swear by them.
And they've replaced much more expensive speakers in a large number of studios. So for us, there was this question of, okay, these are doing really well, and these are entry-level speakers. These are price point speakers. What if we take this architecture, which is obviously working, and put in the sort of budget that top-tier studio monitor manufacturers are putting in? And that's what we've done. So there's everything we've done here is with the pursuit of lowering distortion, which raises headroom. So compared to the IN8s, which don't quote me on this because I'm not looking at the sheet of paper, but I believe we're using 140 watts of power to power an IN8. We're using 300 watts of power to power an SM8. We're using more magnet mass on the woofer. We're using components like shorting rings, which help to reduce magnetic flux, which bring distortion down. All of this stuff just costs money.
Of course it does. Yeah.
And so when we're talking about a higher price point speaker, we can afford to spend the money to get all of these components, which help to bring the distortion down. Easiest thing to point to, the most obvious thing as you're looking at the front of the speaker, is that the SM8s use an aluminum dome tweeter, whereas all of our entry-level speakers use a fabric dome tweeter. Fabric dome tweeters, when designed well, are phenomenal. They preserve the directivity characteristic of the speaker as they go into breakup mode, which is when the tweeter stops moving pistonically and is now moving in breakup. It's moving as a waveform propagates across the surface area of the tweeter. They do that really predictably, and so even though there's distortion as that happens, it's sort of pleasant. It's all very linear. It sounds the way you would want a speaker to sound. When we move now to an aluminum dome tweeter, we don't have that distortion present. We don't have the breakup mode being quite such a problem. We have it moving pistonically through the sonic band. You, I believe, described the tweeter response as smooth as a baby's ass.
It's smooth as a baby's arse. But what I love about the tweeter in it is that it's the whole speaker still sounds like one whole system, which is the thing that I look for. Because obviously especially when I'm on headphones a lot, I'm always looking for this really open, wide image, but it's not too overly hyped. Because I think there's some speakers, again, PSIs being, a part of that for me, where when Ed had his PSIs, I could tell I was listening to a tweeter. Yeah. And that put me off. And some of the best speakers I listen to are the ones where I forget that I'm listening to a pair of speakers.
Yeah.
So when I sit in the sweet spot in there, even though the tweeters, for example, the tweeter isn't pointing directly at me, it's just a pair of speakers that are in front of me that just give me the whole image, and it's like this. That's how I see it. It's just like everything is in its place, and I just don't really second guess things, where there's some speakers that imaging could be a bit of an issue, where again you struggle with depth. So it might be for me, the MTM precisions, and sometimes MTM speakers can sound very forward due to that kind of MTM format. Where I think with me, just this coaxial three-way design, it just opens up really well. My phantom center is still right bang center in the middle, but I could still hear all of the imaging, and it's nothing's overly wide, nothing's overly hyped. And you add that in with the distortion and the headroom. Transients are, and that's what's really impressive to me about the SM8s, and the reason why I've decided to buy them. So yeah, so for anybody thinking when you see SM8s, no YouTuber gets free pair of SM8s. Yeah. It's too expensive. There's no point. But I think what's really important for me with this speaker design, with the three-way, I totally agree with you. Imaging, the best that I've heard. But also the headroom. I mean, these are heavy speakers with the SM8s. Like I was saying to Nate, that when I used to have the Atmos room and I did move stuff about, I was able to have two LP8s on top of each other stacked. I couldn't do that with the SM8s.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a weight in there, and there's a lot of stuff going on in there as well. But the distortion is really important for me. The low end separation is great. I mean, it sounds like a sub in here. I remember when we first had them in and we played about with them and we tried the first tuning, I was like, wow. These sound like a sub, but it was clean, proper low end, to the point in terms of headroom. I remember I played something and it was a lot louder compared to Spotify. We had the level set to that, and even super loud with high SPLs, it didn't fall apart.
Yeah.
And it still sounded coherent, and it didn't sound overly distorted. So I think, headroom is something that's so important when you think about speakers. I think the only other thing we've not really spoken about, and it's probably something that's very important to mention about when you're thinking about speakers, because this is something that you will get more with higher quality designed speakers, is speaker directivity. Because obviously you've got imaging and you've got transients and you've got the localization of those transients. But yeah, talk a little bit about speaker directivity and how that is quite important for translation, but also again in speaker design.
And this is something a lot of amateur speaker builders especially get this wrong. They'll put very high-end components in a very good box and drive it with a very good amplifier, but the directivity is all over the place. And what that means is that the stereo image kind of breaks down.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes possible to solve that in one listening position in one room with you're doing certain things with treatment, maybe you're doing certain things with altering the crossover points of the speakers, the placement of the speakers, all this stuff. It's very difficult to take a speaker out of a box and set it up on a console and know it's going to sound good if you have directivity issues. It's also very difficult if you are applying room calibration, if you're changing the frequency response of the speakers to try and correct for the room. If your directivity is bad, it's going to cause more problems. So You always want to look for a speaker with good directivity, and thankfully there's a lot of people. I would point to Aaron, who does Aaron's Audio Corner. I would point to the good nerds over at Audio Science Review. Talk a lot about speaker directivity and review speakers based on the directivity and do measurements to show you exactly what the speaker's directivity is. I'll hammer this point home. You want the off-axis sound of the speaker to be congruent with the on-axis sound of the speaker because you are always hearing total sound power, which is direct sound from the speakers plus every reflection in the room. When you have good directivity, that means you have good imaging. That means translation is going to be good. That means you don't really have to second guess what you're hearing. It also means exactly what you said. You start to lose the speakers and you hear the mix instead. Okay. When you have bad directivity, and you can try this at home, if you have a pair of two-way speakers, traditional two-way speakers, woofer, tweeter, and you put them on their sides, you will hear the difference in the stereo image immediately. And that's an issue of the directivity characteristic is not going to be good because of that phase cancellation in this plane between the woofer and the tweeter. You will hear all the problems for yourself. You're not going to hear the imaging as well. Your brain will immediately localize the sound as coming from the two speakers. You're going to start to hear the voicing of the speakers in a really prominent way, rather than sort of the timbral sound of your mix. You're hearing speakers now, you're not hearing a mix. And so, if you don't know much about speakers and what makes good directivity, and you don't know how to interpret the charts that people have published, one of the easiest things to look for is, what does the waveguide look like? If you're looking at a two-way speaker and you see a nice elliptical waveguide, especially if it's from a reputable manufacturer, you're probably looking at a speaker with decent directivity. Yeah. If you're looking at a two-way speaker and there is no waveguide whatsoever on that tweeter, you're probably looking at a speaker with crummy directivity, and it's not going to play well with your room, and it's going to be difficult to get it to the point where you can trust what the speaker's doing and trust that it's going to translate. Okay,
so we've got speaker directivity. Now, another thing that I've got in my notes here, and it has been a little bit controversial, and I did, say to Nate, I do want to talk about it, okay? So this is as far as it's going to go, but ports has been a bit of a controversial topic so far. Now, what's interesting for me, Nate, is that I would say 95% of speakers that you see in professional industry studios are ports. They're ported speakers. Obviously, all the Kali speakers are ported. I'm looking at the Head Type 07s that I've got in front of me, the Echos, they're ported. It's actually more difficult to think of speakers that aren't ported compared to ones that are. Now, so I've got two questions, Nate. So, one, why you and other people use a port? And two, the variables of port design, because there is such a thing as a good port and a bad port. So let's start off with number one. Why do so many speaker manufacturers choose to use a port, and are there any misconceptions you think that have been out there on the internet?
Yeah, the misconception I would point out is the idea that a port is bad. Nobody would put ports on their speakers if they were a net negative. So the marketing hype of a port, the reason that we'll say, hey, you should put a port on your speaker, a port is free bass. And there's a huge caveat to that. I'm going to address that in just 1 second. But basically, by putting a port on the speaker, you can take the resonance of the cabinet itself. The port is acting as sort of a soda bottle. When you blow into a soda bottle, it produces a tone. When air passes through a port, it produces a tone. That tone is tuned. It's basically tuned to where the woofer starts to roll off. So that frequency, you get a little bit of extra SPL at that frequency by having a port. So you can extend the bass response of the speaker lower without adding cost, without putting more amplifier power, without putting more woofer power, without making the woofer move backward and forward more, which adds distortion. The caveat is, if you are measuring a speaker in an anechoic chamber and you're measuring group delay, a ported speaker will have higher group delay than a non-ported speaker. Whether or not you can hear that once you put the speaker in a room that is not an anechoic chamber, I think is at least up for debate with a well-designed port. Even if you will say assertively, I can hear the difference between a port and no port in the room based on what I'm hearing in terms of group delay, is that going to make you make worse decisions in your mix because of that? I don't think so. And Charles, who designed these speakers, doesn't think so, and the myriad of people who have designed almost every other studio monitor on the planet do not think so. That being said, there are good ports and there are bad ports. So there are two big problems that can come up. Well, there's three big problems that can come up with ports. If the port isn't tuned well, so if it's tuned to the wrong frequency, and it's not interacting well with the woofer, can be a bit of a mess. That almost never happens these days. If you're buying a speaker from a reputable manufacturer, that's not really something you have to worry about. Ports can have what we call port compression, which is that there is a limit to the amount of air that can move through the port. And if you hit that limit, the port can't produce more SPL, so your frequency response changes. You don't have that sort of lower frequency as you move up in SPL that the speakers are producing. The other thing that happens a lot is a phenomenon called chuffing.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. So what that is air is leaving the port at different velocities. And so you're hearing the air rub against itself as it leaves the port. A really easy way to solve this problem is just put the port on the back of the speaker. Yeah. You will hear it less. That makes it a little bit more difficult to integrate the port. And also you run into limitations of can you put the speaker up against a back wall that way.
Correct.
So a well-designed port that doesn't have chuffing, that doesn't have port compression, you can put it on the front of the speaker. And you don't really have to worry about the port degrading the performance of the speaker that way.
Yep. So you've answered both questions there. Didn't have to ask you again. So what I've got here is that obviously there are different designs. So obviously you've got ported speakers and you've got different variations of ports as well, because I think what many people forget, me included a lot of times, is that a transmission line like PMC is a port.
Yeah.
It's still a port. And again, you've got a closed cabinet, which is, a completely sealed design. So again, Neumann KH310s come into consideration there. And then you've also got passive radiators as well. Many like Amphion use passive radiators. And they all have a sound. And I think that where this comes down to is that there's a lot of science in there. But for me, what we both agree on is that this is where it comes into preference, because the science can tell you a certain thing, but when you've got it in the room, you may prefer the tightness of a sealed cabinet. I don't personally like sealed cabinets. I find that they're just too tight. I prefer ports, personally. Again, there's some passive radiators that I've heard that I like. And, transmission line, again, I did have PMC 226 in here, and it wasn't really for me, and it's not for a few other people. However, you look through the industry, PMC are everywhere. They're like so many people use them. So there is a lot of preference that comes in there. And I think what it's got to come down to is counter-translation. And it is something important to mention. Now, a very good point that you made to me was, yeah, Paul, in the nicest way, it's easy for you to say that when you're a YouTuber who can get speakers sent to you. If you're on a budget, then again, it's going to be difficult to try out a ton of speakers, and it's going to take time. So I think that probably the best kind of conclusion for us about speaker design is to get the best that you can afford, put into consideration all the things that you mentioned, and try and see what's important to you. Like if imaging is something that is really important to you and it's something that you struggle in your translation right now, then consider a coaxial three-way design. If transients and distortion is something that's really important to you, then yeah, you're going to have to go up the budget.
Yep.
And again, so for somebody like me who's very, very, very pernickety and very analytical, these are the first speakers that I've heard where I've been like, yes, this is the linearity and the imaging and the clarity that I want out of a speaker. And anybody that knows me knows that I am super tight and I wouldn't pay thousands unless it was something that I really agreed with. And some people have to go even higher than that. Some people might need to go Dutch and go fucking 10, 11,000. Some people might want even bigger speakers in the room. But I think at the end of the day, it is all about your end results.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're getting really, really good results in your room and it's working, then, don't worry about it. Because at the end of the day, your results and your clients are all that matter. If you're somebody like me that is very anal and wants things a certain way, and I need that form of detail, then yeah, you need to pay more for that, and that is kind of what it is. But I would say for people on a budget, again, please take time, learn them, take as long as you can. But if your results aren't working, then try something else.
Yeah. I tend to disagree with the notion of buy the best speakers you can afford.
Yeah.
As somebody who wants to sell the most expensive speakers we make, I disagree with this notion, especially if you don't know what you want.
Correct.
You don't know what you're looking for. Buy some cheaper speakers. You're going to learn a lot from the first pair of good speakers you buy.
100%. That's a great point.
And I can say unequivocally, whether that's Kali speakers or Yamaha or JBL or Atom or Presonus, if you buy one of those entry-level speakers, you're going to be able to mix on them. Your mixes are going to sound okay, at least. And you are going to learn, what do I like about these? What do I dislike about these? and you're going to be able to make a more informed purchase about your first serious pair of speakers, your first non-entry level pair of speakers.
That is such a good point, and I think that many people do make that mistake where they go on other people's recommendations, they go on what they see, they look at price. Well, you know, a good example of that would be my good friend Ed Thorne. Again, we've made videos about it publicly. He bought the PSIs, and for listening, he still thinks that they're the best for listening. And that's a thing that's very important to mention, that there is listener audiophile quality and there's mixed translation. And mixed translation is different, you know, per room, per person, and we all hear things differently. So I definitely think it is a good bit of advice to start off with, you know, budget-ish speakers, what you can afford, get the best what you can afford, and mix on it. And if you're getting great results, don't change it. It's not broken. I know many people that have had really super expensive speakers, high-profile people, and it's not been for them. I had the PMC 226s and I didn't resonate with them, but I know other people that have and still do. So so that's why I wanted to talk about that was science is one thing and science is really important, but you've got to contrast that with musical listening and what you actually hear and your translation. And if all of them fall into place, then obviously at that point would like to think that if you followed this advice so far, you'd have the right room and you'd have the right speakers that talk to you. And at the end of the day, I think a good test to do a lot of this is to sometimes try a mix without any calibration, just to get the speakers in the room and try a mix. And then you could say, maybe there's a bit of a low mid build, maybe there's this, maybe there's that, I'm maybe not happy about that. And then that brings us to where you'd get to the point where that brings us nicely to the calibration side of it and correcting your rooms. So you've done all the prep, you've done all of the speaker placement, you've done the treatment, you've brought the decay time down, and then you've spent the time to get the right speakers for you in your budget. You can make them better, can't you, Nate? You can improve and fix some of the room issues that you've got. Now, what's very important to caveat this is when we do go into this bit now, is that you cannot fix a bad speaker, right? Bad speaker, poorly designed speaker, right? This room correction isn't a master fix, but it's going to fix design issues. It's going to fix poor crossovers. It's going to fix distortion. It's essentially just an added little tweak that you could make. Sometimes you can make big tweaks and small tweaks, but at the end of the day, if you've done your job right in the prep, then really you shouldn't need to do much. Sometimes you will need to do a bit. It just depends. So what we're going to do is we are going to discuss a few things about measuring speakers in stereo that we believe, especially me after seeing the results and hearing the results, that when I say, I don't want to say wrong, because again, we're in a world of subjectivity, but there are other ways of doing things.
Yep.
And I think that if we start at the very start and we think about, frequency response, I think everybody, me included, as soon as you get Room EQ Wizard, what's the first thing you do? Look at the squiggly line.
Right.
You stick your mic up and you look at the squiggly line and you obsess over the squiggly line and then you start moving stuff. And then you get to a point where you're like, what about if I just moved the mic here? The squiggly line changed. And then you get to a point where you've done all this movement for absolutely nothing. So if you've got your speakers in the right place and you've done your treatment as best as you can, then you need to let the correction do what it's going to do. So when you measure, this is going to be quite controversial for some, but it genuinely does work, is many people are used to what we call a fixed point measurement. And you'll find this with a lot of calibration software where, and again, with the RU, you'll normally stick the measurement microphone where you think your head is going to be, in the middle of it, and you stick it there and you measure it and you say, that's going to be my response. However, there is another method, and we have it's not really got an exact name, but I think we called it the moving mic method. So Nate, describe to people what the moving mic method is, how you set it up, and why it's better than the fixed method for frequency response.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying this frequency domain. Somebody's gonna chime in and say, what about time domain? We're talking about different things.
But we'll get to time domain.
To your point, if you put one microphone in a position and you do take a measurement, you're going to get a certain squiggly line. If you move that microphone an inch in any direction, you are going to get a markedly different squiggly line. So which is correct? You don't know. How many squiggly lines do you need to get, and how many of them do you need to average until what you're hearing is reflective until what you're measuring is reflective of what you're hearing. That is a question that we have sought to solve. And so Charles Sprinkle, who is our lead acoustics engineer, has published a white paper on exactly this topic. And the long and short of it is we have found that about 256 microphones in a space roughly the size of your head will give you a reliable measurement in terms of what you're hearing in terms of total sound power. I've used that phrase before. And I'll just reiterate what that means is what you're actually hearing, because it's direct sound from the speakers as well as reflected sound from everywhere in the room. That is what a human being hears when they sit.
Not just one point source that's pointing directly at the speakers. We are hearing reflections. Sound is coming around us.
So 256 microphone positions is about what will correlate psychoacoustically to what you're perceiving as the sound. That is impractical.
Very impractical.
To say the least. And so we have correlated data for those 256 microphone positions. We're getting the same data if we take a microphone and we move it through space, again, roughly the space representing the area of your head. What we're doing is we're playing pink noise. We are taking 3 measurements per second. Typically, we do a total of about 100 measurements and averaging all those together. Yeah. There's a lot of advantages to that. 100 averages doing 3 per second means that your measurement time is about 30 seconds per speaker. You then need to verify it, so call it 1 minute per speaker, but it's a lot lower than a lot of other measurement techniques. It is highly repeatable. If you take the measurement, you will get one result. If I take the measurement, I will get the same result.
And we can prove it. So what a big thing, and I will caveat this, there's a very specific saying that I had to ask. I forgot what it was, but there is a saying that is universal, which is measure twice, cut once. And every measurement that we made, it was always double check your measurements. And what is amazing is that it doesn't matter if I'm up, down, and I change the way that I do it. And as long as I'm kind of just randomly up, down, left, right, up, down, you then start to see the average fold on top of the last measurement. Yeah. And it's very, very, I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but it does genuinely nearly fold right on top of each other. And it's amazing that the measurement mic is picking up a different source every single time. But that average is what we're getting. And yeah, it's very, very different from using just a fixed point source. And it's amazing how I could do it. And as you said, you can do it and we'll get the same measurement.
Yeah, and I can do it. I can come back in a week.
Yeah.
And I will get the same measurement.
Correct, yeah.
Which is something I don't think anybody who's doing even an array of fixed microphone positions can reliably say.
Correct.
So this is reliable data, it's repeatable data, it's fast, and it's psychoacoustically valid. And I think that is an incredibly powerful combination.
So for anybody wondering, how does this work in Room EQ Wizard? How do you set this up? Because obviously you've got to have the pink noise and then you've got to measure it in Room, you've got to set it up. So again, it's taking, what many measurements did you say?
3 per second.
3 per second. So how do you set that up?
So the learning curve in all this is Room EQ Wizard. It's really powerful software.
Very, very powerful.
But there's a lot of options. And there's a lot of options that will only make sense if you are an incredibly well-educated audio nerd. Yeah. So we have this published. If you go to caliaudio.com/Santa Monica how-to, we have a whole, it's I think a 10 series YouTube videos as well as an accompanying PDF. And we will show you exactly how to set up Room EQ Wizard to take the measurements that we're talking about. We walk you through all the menus. It takes a little bit of time, be patient, but all the information's there. And the thing that I'll hammer home there, this is not just for Cali. This measurement method is valid for any speaker in any environment.
Correct. And genuinely something to try, and it's very, very logical as well. So we've got the frequency response measured using our moving mic method. So what do we do with that? Well, what we then need to do is we need to match that to a target. Now this brings us on to where the variables are per software correction manufacturer. There are different targets. Even Dolby has their own, target curve. And you have found that there is a target that you can match to in Room EQ Wizard. Again, that'll be in the PDF and in the videos as well. So talk a little bit about the slope and the target and how you can use that to get a overall tonal macro balance that will translate.
Yep. So if you're measuring a speaker in an anechoic chamber, and you're measuring the speaker directly on axis, your ideal frequency response is dead on flat from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. If you are measuring in a room the way we're measuring, if you had dead on flat from 20 to 20, it's going to sound really harsh, because what that means is there's so much high frequency energy that by the time it all reverberates and has all this destructive interference, you're still getting equal energy from 20 to 20. That's not going to sound right. So we recommend a target slope. I don't want to use the word curve because the slope does not curve, between 0.2 and 0.5 dB per octave from 20 to 20, which translates to 2 dB down at 20 kilohertz from 20 hertz all the way to 5 dB down at 20 kilohertz from 20 hertz. The reason we don't use a curve is because curves have inflection points, and psychoacoustically this does something really interesting, even though there is not more energy at the inflection point. So let's say we set it to flat from 20 hertz to 1 kilohertz, and then we have a roll-off from 1 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz. We will perceive more energy at 1,000 hertz, even though it's not there. Same thing if we do the inverse. If we have it roll up at a certain frequency, we will perceive a null at that inflection point. The difference between having a 2 dB difference and a 5 dB difference from 20 to 20 is very room dependent. And so what we're trying to do, this is an important point, and we maybe should have made this earlier. The speaker plus the room is functioning as an acoustic system.
Yeah, it's all one system.
It's all one system. And what we don't want to do is fight that system.
Yeah.
So we don't want to fight the characteristic of how the speaker sounds in the room. So depending on how much treatment you have, depending on how large your room is, depending a little bit on personal preference, but again, more to do with the system of room plus speaker, it's going to naturally follow a certain slope. Yeah. And all we're trying to do is make some small adjustments to fit it to the slope better. We never want to go and say, okay, this speaker has 0.2 dB per octave fall off from 20 to 20, but I prefer 0.5 dB, so I'm going to force everything this certain way. It's going to sound wrong. Similarly, you can be working in one room that does like 0.2 dB per octave. You can be working in another room that does like 0.5 dB per octave. And in both situations, if you have it tuned to the room appropriately, your translation is going to be good.
And that was something that we found, which is why it's very important when you do all of this, is always to hark back to your ears.
Yeah.
A lot. So when we did the first one, you had a certain target slope for the SM8s, and I sat down and I was like, low end sounds fun, and the top end maybe is a bit too dark for me. And then I got you to sit in the position you thought, I agree with you. And I think you just changed it by, just a decimal point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just changed the slope by 1 decimal point. And straight away, I listened, there's my top end, there's transients. Low end wasn't as fun, it was more accurate. And I was like, that's it. And then straight away, I was like, oh, maybe could we tweak it and tweak that? And you just said to me, does it sound good? It's like, yeah, it sounds great. It's like, you're done.
Yeah. And that's always the case.
Yeah.
Whether we're tuning the room, whether you get bi-Cali speakers or not, if it sounds good, stop.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it. And it also puts into microcosm something that is really important. Any of these changes you make, listen.
Yeah.
We have all this data. We have all these best practices. I did it the right way, right? I'm the guy who does this. This is what I believe to be correct. Until you're sitting in the listening position and saying, this sounds the way I want it to sound, nothing I do matters.
Correct. And I think another thing to bring up when we think about using your eyes versus using your ears is something that you taught me yesterday that blew my autistic Scottish mind was nulls. So when you look at a frequency response, before we had this discussion, I was under the assumption that every low-end null was bad and couldn't be fixed because it's phase cancellation, which it is. Until Nate said to me, Paul, there is a difference between a 3-dimensional null and a 1-dimensional null. And I was like, oh, okay, you're twisting my melon, man. I was like, okay. And there is a massive difference between understanding a 3-dimensional null and a 1-dimensional null. A 3-dimensional null cannot be fixed because it is full cancellation, where a 1-dimensional null can. And the only way to do that, and again, this is something that I should have known when I'm frustrated with myself, is that why it's very important that what many people do, and many people don't do, I say 90% of people don't do this, is they actually make a post-correction measurement. And so no matter the software correction that you're using, you should always, I'm speaking to you right now, do a post measurement, please do a post measurement and actually check what the correction's doing. When you are in correction software, and it's the same with Room EQ Wizard when it gives you what it calls, which is correct, a predictive measurement. What all the software correction manufacturers are doing when they show you that squiggly line, what they say is correct, that's a prediction.
Yeah.
That's actually not what's in the room. And I think what's really important to talk about is sometimes, we may see a null in a room, and then again, it might be Trinov, it might be, arc, it might be something else, and it corrects it, and you in your head think, it can't do that. Like I've been told that a null can't fix it, and I've got to then, change my mindset, and I can't do that. So I've got to be scared of boosts. And I know many people that are of this belief of you can only cut, you can never boost in correction, which brings us into a few different forms of discussion. So explain to people very briefly about the difference between a 3-dimensional null, a 1-dimensional null, and why you actually can fix nulls with room correction, but there is a caveat to that, and that involves headroom.
Yep. So a 1-dimensional null, if we're looking at the space that we're in right now, we have this front to back, and we are going to have a room mode that creates a null. So some frequency is going to bounce back and forth between these two walls and the speakers and cancel at the listening position. The thing is, it's unlikely that that same frequency is going to cancel as that sound wave is moving side to side and up and down. Yeah. And so if it were 1-dimensional, if the only dimension that we were worried about was the front to back dimension, let's say you didn't have walls, you didn't have a ceiling, you are absolutely correct. Adding energy is just reinforcing the null. Yeah. But because we have energy that's reverberating from the sides and reverberating from the top, as we add energy to the system, that extra reverberation can fill in that null and get us linear through the bass region. Yeah. You can fix a 1-dimensional null because you're in 3-dimensional space. Yeah. So you're adding energy, and the way that it's working with dimensions that are not producing your null is basically giving you linear frequency response at the listening position.
And the only way to know if you've got a 3-dimensional null or a 1-dimensional, okay, there are ways in Roux that you could, if you're a clever clogs, you can try and figure it out. But genuinely, the easiest way to do it is to do a post-correction measurement. Yep. And if you still see the big null, then yes, a full null. And what you're doing is you're trying to get the correction to push the speaker unnecessarily. Yep. And in those situations, those would be the situations where you would be thinking about moving the speaker.
Yeah. And typically, so there is no one answer to this question. There are best practices, like how much energy can you add? Yeah. Some people say 6 dB, some people say 12 dB. It really depends on what is the headroom of the speaker at the listening position. You have SM8s, which are rated for reference level at 5 meters. And you're listening
loud.
Yeah. You're listening at a hair over a meter. Yeah. So we're not worried about headroom here at all. We can correct a lot before we're getting close to the headroom of the system or introducing audible distortion above what the speaker's already doing. So we don't have to worry about that. But if these were LP8s, if these were other less expensive speakers, it would be a consideration. Maybe we're not going to put as much energy to correct a null. You brought up the point that you've heard the advice of you should never add energy. You should only ever pull energy down. So there's 2 important points to make. The first one is that's not necessarily bad advice. It is easier to correct too much energy than it is to correct too little energy. And you aren't adding distortion to the system when you take energy down, if all you're doing is taking energy down. What some people think is if I am only subtracting energy and I subtract to the level of the lowest level of response in my system, then I haven't added energy. Yeah. But what you've done is reduced the headroom of the system.
Which you then have to bring up for the volume.
Yeah, because you're going to bring the level up.
Correct.
And now, effectively, you have filled in your null. You've boosted. Yeah.
Correct.
Exactly. Yeah. This goes back to the point of, where do I put the speakers in the room? Because if I put them against the back wall, I'm likely to have more of a buildup of energy.
Yep.
So if you're looking for something that is maybe a little more easily correctable, maybe, depending on other factors in your room, put them up against the back wall because you'll be able to take that energy out with correction.
So is that one of the reasons why this kind of rule that's came out where you should never boost more than 6 dB, boost or cut more than 6 dB comes from, is a lot of budget speakers not having the headroom to be able to take that amount of boost?
Yeah. It has to do with that. It has to do with, big steps that you're making. If you don't have a reliable measurement,
very true.
then you want to be more careful with what you're doing. If you do have a reliable measurement and you know your speakers have the headroom to be able to process this, if it's really bad, move the speakers. But if the speakers are where they have to be in the room because, you've bolted a desk to the floor or other factors that are considerations, and you have speakers that have a lot of headroom, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that many people don't talk about, and is one of the reasons why many people will pay more for something like the SM8s, because of the headroom. Like when you said to me that, Paul, we could boost like 15, 20 dB in those and you won't really get any audible distortion, I was like, blew my mind. But then obviously if you try to do that with LP8s, of course you're going to bring an audible distortion to the system. So that is something to bear in mind. But again, another thing that I think is very important to touch on as well is listening distance, because at the end of the day, a lot of people will be in smaller rooms and their listening distance will be, an equilateral triangle of, maybe 1 meter, 1.5 meters.
Yep.
And at those distances, you're not going to really have that much of an issue with headroom. Where that then comes into speaker choice again, and probably should have mentioned this, was that when you really do need headroom is if your listening position is going to be far.
Yep.
So especially if you've got like what I've got here, where, sometimes I'll want to have, the listening position further back of a couch. Could be that's where you get your mixes approved. And, if you need to have that louder, or you might have a calibration where it's like, right, okay, I know that gain, because I know I've seen people do it where, okay, this is my listening volume and then this is their listening volume. It could be a thing where when your client's listening to that mix at the back of the room, you've pushed the speaker so far that it doesn't have the headroom and then it's now distorting for them.
Yep.
Here it sounds great,
Yep.
but then it's like kind of crapping out back there. So again, these are all things that you've got to think about because they all are intertwined. So especially when you're doing room correction, understanding the headroom of your speaker is really, really important. And that's why it's important to put the prep in so you know that, right, I don't need to do a crap ton of work with these.
Yeah.
So again, when I placed these in my room, I just found that, like a low-end null is nearly unavoidable. It's unavoidable, but knowing now there's a one-dimensional null and a three-dimensional null, I know that, okay, when they're in that position, it's really only that low-end null I'm thinking about because the rest of it is pretty much flat and I don't really need to worry about it. So the only other thing that's going to come into this is many people talk a lot because they will see when you follow this method, the Room EQ Wizard method where you match to the target, to the slope. Some of the Q values are very, very tight. We're talking sometimes, 7.5 Q, which is very tight. And people are like, oh my God, like, will you even hear that? Which then brings you into the talk of phase, because again, a lot of what we're doing here is, minimum phase, and you can use linear phase as well. But talk to us a little bit about EQ correction in regards to phase, and again, the why you are doing sometimes narrow notches that are like, a Q of like 7.
Yeah. So the EQs that are being processed are reflective of the performance of the loudspeaker at the listening position. Yeah. So you already have these narrow notches that are going on. For me, the proof is in the pudding. I've tuned a lot of these rooms. I've been with Charles as he's tuned a lot of these rooms. I've seen the correction that's gone in. I've put correction in. I've had people listen. And, I've had people like Jeff Ellis, Bob Clearmountain, and done these sort of big moves. They haven't had any issues.
Yep.
I don't have the best ears in the world, but I've heard a lot of good speakers in a lot of good rooms, and I'm not hearing the issues of phase problems in the low end with those corrections in.
Which, again, comes to the point of if it sounds good, it is good. Where I think what many people, and again, me included, I get all this kind of, that's why, again, Dan Worrell's got a great video about don't fear the phase shift. Because if phase is a part of audio, it's all science at the end of the day. But I think what's really important to caveat with this is that what you've kind of taught me with the time, especially with the Atmos room, is that you look at the post measurement, and if the post measurement is, following, and now again, we're not talking perfect slope, and at the end of the day, you're only using maximum of 8 bands of EQ. It's very different from some other software correction manufacturers that will do a lot of points. and do a lot of mirror correction, where we are trying to fix what you taught me is probably trying to fix the biggest problems. And that's the thing about speaker correction, is that you're not trying to like anally fix every single minutia. What your main aim is to look at the biggest problems and can I fix these, similar to what I do with headphone EQs. What are the problems and how can I fix these and get to the end result that I'm looking for? Because when I seen the null and the low end null and the SM8s, and then after it, I was like, this can't be possible. Played the speakers, I was like, this sounds amazing. There it goes. I didn't have any hole in the low end. So yeah, a part of this has to be just trust the system, trust the process, and use your ears at the end of the day.
Yeah. So what's really important is you should be able to correlate the measurements you're taking with what you're hearing. If you can't, then almost anybody who's done studio work has pretty good ears, should be able to say, what I'm hearing is flat, what I'm hearing is what I like to hear. And for example, because this came up, if you measure two speakers and they sound different, but the measurements are the same, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And so there are questions about what is your measurement technique, where is the issue in your signal chain, and maybe the issue is in your brain. If you measure two speakers and they measure the same, sure, there will be distortion differences. Depending on the architecture of the speaker, there might be imaging differences, which have to do with off-axis phase. But the overall timbral experience of two speakers that measure the same should be dead on similar. Yeah. And if they're not, either your measurement's wrong or you've done something else wrong.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, we've talked about all that. And I think another thing to mention was a lot of these really, really narrow kind of, like QS7, really narrow notches, is the resonances. And I think that's what many people forget, is that a lot of times in audio, I especially hear it when I hear resonances of something. And again, sometimes we don't want to take those out because it can be musical, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But, in a monitoring situation, you're wanting the cleanest result possible. And there's nothing worse if you've got this really kind of narrow resonance that could be there and could be impacting how you hear things. So again, that's something not to be afraid of, is that, again, trust the process. And yeah, there are resonances in there. And if it does need, a really, really narrow boost or a narrow notch, then, listen to it. And, does it sound good post? So that's essentially how we would say that you would fix the frequency response. So we've talked about the prep. We've talked about the method that you use for measuring. So again, you use the moving mic method. Again, use that via Room EQ Wizard. We've talked about measuring and then double measuring. Again, always double checking the measurements that you've done, which again, there's a method that is that in the PDF as well, even the double check?
That's in the PDF. And we even went into this to illustrate, typically if you do one measurement and then you immediately repeat the measurement and there's a difference, it's typically a noise floor issue. And so one of the things we did as we were filming the video is we did the measurement, got a nice clean measurement. Then we did the measurement with all the crew in the room making a bunch of noise, and we got a completely different measurement. Then we turned everything up 10 dB. Yep. We had the crew make the same amount of noise. We got one clean measurement. We got a second clean measurement. Okay.
And that was another thing you said was, again, an important thing to do is at least try and be in a good position as well. So when you are, and because especially in the Atmos room, I was like, no, Paul, you need to be at that angle because you're actually in the way of the speaker. Yep. But in a stereo, it's really easy to do. Just sit in the middle and then you just wave it around like a magic Harry Potter wand. Yep. Wingardium Leviosa. There you go. Speaker's fixed. And that really should be all you need to do. Suppose the only thing that I've not mentioned, that's not in my notes, but it's came in my head here, was the measurement mic you use. Now, Kali are advising the Earthworks mic. Now, obviously, there are different measurement mics you could use. Now, many people will balk at the price of the Earthworks because it's a measurement mic. But again, explain to people quickly why. Again, you don't need to. Again, you can get a SonarWorks mic with a CAL file and stuff like that. But explain to me and others why you choose to use the Earthworks mic.
Yeah, so most of the problems that are going to come up in the room are going to come up below 700 hertz. Yeah. And most decent measurement mics are pretty flat below 700 hertz. Yeah. So do you need to use a $600 measurement mic? You don't need to, but if you want to know exactly what's going on from 20 to 20, this is one way to do it. The reason for that is most measurement mics are advertised as omnidirectional. There's no such thing as an omnidirectional mic. You will get a slightly different response if your source is behind the mic versus in front of the mic. It has to do with the shape of the microphone's body and cancellations that are happening because of that. So you have to correct for that if you are taking this moving microphone average that moves the mic through space. We built a correction file for an Earthworks M23R. Earthworks M23Rs are phenomenally well manufactured. We know that that correction file is valid for every single Earthworks microphone.
Correct.
Yeah. Whereas a lot of the less expensive microphones, you need a per microphone correction file, which frankly we don't have the time to do. Coming up with and what we're calling this is a random incidence calibration file. So basically, it does not matter where the microphone is pointing relative to the speaker that's coming from it. You're still going to get the same result. It takes a little bit of time and a lot of math to come up with that file, so it's difficult to do. It's not necessarily something you're going to be able to do on your own. The easy solution here is just go buy the microphone that we've already done the work on. We're also talking with DPA to do one of their microphones, but again, it's a higher price microphone. For stereo, and again, if we're talking about correcting below 700 hertz, and we're talking about making some big steps. Not big steps, but broadband steps to just smooth things out. Almost any measurement microphone is going to get you probably close enough. We know that this particular measurement microphone will get you there. The other thing that's valid about this is that when you're using random incidence calibration, it doesn't matter where the speaker is positioned in the room. So if you're doing Atmos, as an example, we take the same measurement for every single speaker, and we don't have to worry about the microphone's polar pattern affecting measurements, whether the source is in front of us or behind us or above us.
So are there any limitations to using the moving mic technique with, say, for example, if you've got a SonarWorks mic with a cal file? Because I'm just thinking there, obviously, you've got to select which one you use in terms of the cal file. So you can have, at the 0 degrees, you can have, 90 degrees?
It's 90 or 45. Yeah.
Something like that.
So I would probably use the 90.
Okay.
And I would go into that knowing I probably don't want to trust much above 700 hertz. And even below 700 hertz, this is painting me a picture. This is 1080p. This is not 4K. And so there might be places where it might not be exactly dead on, but you should be able to get a lot closer than you otherwise would.
Where if you go with the Earthworks mic with your calibration file, you can do that and you're not going to have any surprises.
Yeah, across the entire frequency spectrum.
Which again, I suppose, is one of these things where if you want to really, 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 really do it right, especially, look, if you're spending $5,000 on a pair of SM8s, to extra 600 quid, again, you can even get a loaner one. Again, I had somebody that was doing drums and we tried the Earthworks on a snare. Sounded great. But again, try and get a loan of it. Or if you're going to be doing it, then buy it, sell it.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Well, here's the other thing is, we've made a lot of carpentry references here. A measurement microphone is a really valuable thing to have in a studio.
100%.
And a well-built measurement microphone like the ones that I mentioned, that's something you're going to own the rest of your life. You buy it once, it's a phenomenal investment in getting your speakers sounding good in your room. And the next time you move into a different room or get a new pair of speakers, you spend $600 once and you have probably saved yourself thousands of dollars in terms of room treatment, acoustical consulting, going through speaker after speaker after speaker, trying to find the right one for your room.
And I suppose that, again, to kind of end on that, would be the most important thing is the measurement, because what we are basing everything off is the measurement.
Yeah.
Again, the measurement is going, and we're matching that to a target, and we're trusting the measurement. So if you don't have the best measurement that you can trust, then you're not going to have the best results that you can trust.
Absolutely.
So that's how you do frequency response. So that's how we would advise you that you can do frequency response better. Now, there is one last part of the puzzle, and this is where a fixed mic position actually works best, which is in the time domain.
Yeah, so whenever I'm measuring a system, I do the frequency measurements, and then we put the microphone and we do sweep measurements of every individual speaker. That's going to tell us a bunch of valuable things. That tells us the impulse response of the speaker. Yep. And we can look at the impulse response, and we can see that every speaker that is the same speaker, so if we have SM8s everywhere, they should have an impulse response that looks exactly the same. And it should go the same direction. If we have one going the other direction, we know something's out of phase. Yep. And that's a very easily there's our problem. Let's work on fixing that. We get the RT60 or waterfall or spectrogram, however you want to look at decay time in your room. That should be easily correlated to your raw frequency response before correction.
Yeah.
So if your RT60 has lumps, you should see the same lumps in your frequency response. And if you want to address those before you use room correction, that's where you would use a tuned bass trap to address those specific issues. You also get distortion data. It should be noted that it's system distortion data.
Very important.
So it's microphone plus interface plus speakers plus room. So this isn't a lab measurement on your speaker's distortion, but it can tell you, if you've got a speaker with a loose component or something, it would tell you right away, hey, we've got an issue here. Or if you put in too much correction and you see really nonlinear distortion, especially on the bottom end, you'll hear it, but you'll also have data to back that up. I think the question you actually asked me was about time alignment. So how we do time alignment is we look at the impulse response. We look at where the speaker starts responding in the impulse response. So if you look at an impulse response, you'll see a little tiny squiggly line and then some big spikes. We time align to the very start of that little tiny squiggly line, and we do that for every speaker in the system. With stereo, this isn't such a big deal. With any immersive format, even down to 5.1, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to get everything truly equidistant. And so that's where time aligning the speakers comes into play. And then when you're adding a subwoofer, you need to time align the subwoofer to the mains. If you've just started out, if you have your first subwoofer, you're in a home studio, you're not doing mastering, this might not be something you want to worry about. Get the subwoofer roughly in the same vertical plane as the speakers and trust.
Just trust acoustics. That's going to work.
Yeah.
Just trust physics, sorry.
But if you have taken the time and you've invested, even in a crummy measurement mic, you can do all these time domain measurements with a crummy mic. You'll be able to see the difference between the arrival of the wavefront between your mains and the sub, and you can time align everything correctly.
Yeah. But I suppose, again, it all comes back to just do it right. So really, this impulse response measurement should just be a double check to make sure that you have positioned the speakers correctly and that there are no timing issues. Because theoretically, there shouldn't be if you do your job right. If you toe the speakers incorrectly, and I suppose that's maybe the last thing that we've never really. I'm just trying to think of the last things that people might ask. I've got the SM8s in a horizontal position because they can do that, and we've got them tweeter out versus tweeter in. Now, are there any time alignment issues in any of these formats, whether you have them vertical, horizontal, tweeter in, tweeter out, as long as it's the symmetry? There.
As long as you're symmetrical, you're fine. If you're you should do your time domain measurements. Even with a stereo pair. Even without a sub. If you find a surprise, you've got a real problem on your hands. But 98 times out of 100, you're not going to find any surprises at all.
Yeah, totally. So, for anybody asking, just because they might say, "Oh, well, you have just dropped a little nugget there about tweeter in, tweeter out." Again, it all comes down to preference, doesn't it, mate?
I don't like the term preference.
Right, okay.
It comes down to listening. And let's be agnostic. This doesn't matter for just Kali speakers. This matters for any speaker. A great place to start is an equilateral triangle where the tweeters are aimed directly at your ears. A lot of people find that they perceive a better stereo image moving the speakers outward a little bit, so the tweeters are both aimed to a point slightly behind your head.
Just here.
With a speaker like the SM or the IN series, where you can put it on its side and you can do tweeters in, tweeters out, usually it works better with tweeters out. Sometimes it works better with tweeters in. And it's just something, again, you cannot go into any part of this process thinking you know what the right thing to do is. The right thing to do is try a bunch of different stuff, get measurements, correlate your measurements to what you're hearing, and make decisions based on that.
Correct. And I think that now covers everything, because at the end of the day, the way that you ended that there is perfect. So I think to end up, what we would advise is that, one, prep. And again, experiment before you even try to do any of this stuff. Think about your budget. Think about, the best value that you can get, and think about the limitations of the speaker and if the limitations of that speaker can work in your room. So again, in regards to the listening distance, in regards to the acoustical compromises, how much correction it's going to need if it has the headroom to deal with that. And then in regards to the the measurement side of it, for us, again, get a very good measurement mic, as you suggested, and again, it'll be a lifelong investment, because there'll always be times, again, the amount of measurements I've done over the years, I always say this is the last measurement. I always say this is the last measurement. But again, if you're trying loads of speakers, then it's going to happen. But yeah, hopefully you should get to a point where you've done the first measurement right, you've done an EQ that isn't too destructive, works with the speaker, fixes the problems in the room that you've got, it's to the right target, with the right tonal balance, with the right translation. And then really it's just a case of sticking with that, learning that sound, learning that accuracy, and then hopefully from there you just live your best life, and hopefully, your translation speaks volumes.
Yep.
Yeah. So Nate, thank you so much for now when I say to people taking the time, you have taken so much time, an 11-hour flight and then 7-hour drive, and then we were up, and was it 12:30 last night?
Yeah.
And we're still not finished. We've still got to do little tweaks on the Atmos room. So yeah, if you are interested in any of the Kali audio products, again, I'll leave a link in the description down below. And just to make it clear, this isn't being sponsored. I haven't been paid a dime.
I mean, I did fly here. So
I know. The payment is generally to have Nate here. I'm not even joking you. That is the payment. So yeah, there will be a few more videos discussing subs. So again, I'll kind of take whatever knowledge I could get out of Nate's brain and then make that into another piece of content about subs, going into a bit of good detail. And then there'll be one about the Atmos room as well. And yeah, it'll be like a trio video, because I just want to get as much good information out there as possible, because I do think there is a lot of misleading information out there, unfortunately. So yeah, Nate, thank you so much for your time. My name's Paul Third. That's Nate back with us, and I'll see you when I see you.